Hi, everybody. All right, so good to be in Paris to talk about music NFTs, and especially in particular in Dotsama. So first, I'm going to start my presentation and talk about the different technological revolutions that have changed music over the history of humanity. First, we had writing that allowed composers to pass down their music through generations, because before it was just passed down orally. And then we had recordings that allowed music to be created and distributed en masse to the whole world. And then we had mass media with TV and television, and that created a system where the content production and distribution was more and more centralized in big corporations. And then we had a new revolution, and it was the internet. And what the internet did is that all of a sudden we didn't need middlemen to produce and get content, and all of a sudden people could download music for free, but artists were not paid, so that wasn't a perfect model. So now let's talk about blockchain and NFTs and how it's a new revolution for music. So first, on a high-level note, I want to mention about the new paradigm that is decentralization. Before, we had the Industrial Revolution, where big corporations were focusing on the most profitable products, and that's also true for music, with the music industry, where the industry is going to focus on the most popular artists, the so-called superstars that have millions of fans and who are the most profitable, but small artists, it's very hard for them to make a living in this kind of economy. And in the new paradigm of decentralization, the idea is that thanks to internet, even niche products, small communities, small artists have their chance of making a living and distributing their music. So I think a lot of people know here the word Web3, implying that it's a third internet revolution. But let's talk about the first internet revolution. So on one side, on the left, we had the free internet with torrents, with LimeWire, Pirate Bay. I want to mention what that city, so for people who don't know, it was the biggest torrent database of music in the history of humanity. Actually, it was the biggest record of human music in the history of humanity. And so the advantage is that it was really good quality and that anybody could get whatever music they wanted as long as they uploaded music in return. The problem is that it was illegal and that it was shut down by French authorities, and also that artists weren't paid for music that was downloaded. On the other hand, we have the big corporations who have created a product because they were endangered by the birth of illegal downloads. So they created streaming platforms such as Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, and so on. And those services had better user experience because open source projects don't really have the money or the will to hire UX developers. But the problem with these platforms is that they don't really pay artists their fair share, and actually only the major artists can make a living out of streamings, and even so they don't really get the full share of their revenues. So here comes NFTs that solve both those problems. At the same time, it allows artists to own their music, to own the full revenue of their music, and in a legal way. And there's it brings complete transparency on the way that revenues are shared to the artist. On the last note, from the high-level analysis on why music NFTs are great, I want to mention the long tail. So I'm not going to go into detail, but for short, the idea is that if the x-axis is the number of basically of different musics that exist, and the y-axis is the number of people who listen to it. Big corporations have been catching the head, which is 80% of the market, by just tackling 20% of the music that there is, to simplify. And the idea is that with internet, there's a whole tail, long tail of niche products that are listened by very few people, or like not enough for corporations to invest into them, but it's a real market that people care about, and it's real music that people want to listen to. I also mentioned this really cool article about the 1,000 True Fans, because it summarizes this idea. The idea is, as a musician, if you just want to make a living out of music, like you don't want to be a star, like all you care is make music and make a living out of it, all you need is 1,000 true fans. Like, so with US standards of living, the calculus is, if a true fan spends $100 a year on your product, so that's events, albums, streams, and so on, and then if you have 1,000 true fans, you are making 100K a year, which is enough to live in the US. So at the end of the day, we don't need artists to become super famous, we just need them to have 1,000 true fans. So that brings us to the most interesting, or the most talked about feature of music NFTs, and that's royalties. So the advantage of music NFTs is that royalties can be transparently shared to the artist. So it doesn't mean that 100% of the revenues will go to the artist, because the artist might need some services to promote their music, to distribute it, but at least they will have full control of what share of those revenues will go to them. We have a lot of startups here in the Ethereum space working on that. There's one called Opulus. The idea is to make loans to artists and then get money back out of those loans by taking a share of the revenues. So I think it illustrates all the potential and the creativity that is allowed by financing music through NFTs. This slide is an even more extreme version of a royalty NFT. They're called IP NFTs. So on the left is a completely out of music example. VitaDAO, what they do is biotech. They finance longevity research, but they are using IP NFTs, or at least they're aiming to do so. Invarsh is on Polkadot and is a blockchain aiming at creating IP NFTs. What's interesting about them is that NFT ownership is a little bit vague, especially when it comes to comparison with the real world. Like, is NFT, is it ownership? Is it a license? Does it give the owner the right to use the art and take revenues out of it? Or is it just the right to use it for personally? IP NFTs are supposed to solve those problems. And now, community building, I think is the other big feature that musicians are really interested in. Actually, to prepare this presentation, I have interviewed a lot of musicians that are on Dotsama. Most of them are in the Chaos Collective. And they did mention revenues, of course, but community was one of the things that they appreciated the most about the blockchain space, and Dotsama in particular. There's a lot of flexibility with NFTs. People can basically sell NFTs that represent access to exclusive content, or events, or maybe even music. And I learned that Coachella, the famous Californian festival, is now making NFTs for proof of attendance, just like a lot of crypto conferences are doing. And I think it completely makes sense, because people want to share their experience and want to share the concerts they go to. Also, I saw this startup called Pianity. It's interesting because they're playing on different levels of scarcity, and it's gamifying music and creating, basically, it's creating content and hype around the community. So I think it's an interesting tool for musicians as well. So on this slide, we have generative NFTs or parametric NFTs. So you probably know them in 2D. Maybe the most famous one is Bored Ape. The idea is that we can tweak a few parameters. In the case of 2D, it's maybe features of a profile pic. In the case of music, it can be the drums, it can be the BPM, it can be the melody, it can be filters. And basically, we can randomly create a collection of thousands of pieces of music. So what is the difference between generative NFT and parametric? It's very close. The difference is that with parametric, the user can play around in an interface and then mint an NFT that they have found by playing around. So Vibes.xyz is a really interesting project that allows the user to do that, to basically tweak all these parameters and it will create different music. Here we have two projects on Ethereum, OMG Kirby and Audioglyphs, that are working on similar concepts. And then there is composable music, which is actually what brought me to music NFTs recently. I actually even developed a proof of concept that I'm going to talk about later. But here on the top, you see 3 projects that are already doing that on Ethereum. Async Art, Secret Garden, and Stems DAO. The idea, it's always a little bit different, but the idea is that we're going to have an artist that create a base, which is a collection of music samples, a collection of loops. So for those who are familiar with electronic music creation or most modern music creation, a musician records the different instruments. So there are the drums, the bass, synthesizer, guitar, all of this separated, and a producer can remix them, play around with them, and create new songs. And the idea here is those websites allow the user to do so, but with samples of music that are NFTs. So the third one, Stem DAO, for example, is a pretty cool project, in my opinion, where they ask artists to create bits of music, and then they organize remix contests. And the idea is that the user is also an artist, and it's breaking the boundary between artist and consumer, basically. And then we have the most extreme version of music NFTs, in my opinion. So DAW is the technical term for an interface to create music, such as Ableton, Fruity Loops. And RPG created DAW on the browser, where users can create a whole music, and the whole process is turned into an NFT. On the right, we have a project that is not NFT related, but really interesting in my opinion. It's called Reactronica. It's a React library, so front-end library, that allows user to use components, React components that are either filters or audio synthesizer, samplers, all of this open source, and that's what I use to create my proof of concept. So all I've talked about before is just general music NFTs, not specific to Dotsama. But so now, why is Dotsama a particularly good blockchain to be as a musician? Well, so I've asked around the musicians of Dotsama, of course. I think the #1 thing that came up is that it's the most innovative ecosystem that's out there. Like, that's something that a lot of musicians are focusing on. They just don't want to make the same music that they were making before. They want to innovate. They want to be in a community that strives for new feature and innovation. Second thing that came up, of course, is the great community. How basically, as a musician, it's hard to find support, and in this community, people are really interested in innovation, in people trying. There will be chaos, so people are accepting of other people's failure if they're trying to do something new, and that's really cool for musicians. And finally, I think it's not negligible, is that Polkadot and Kusama are proof-of-stake blockchains, and so they are environmentally friendly, and for a lot of artists, that's something that's pretty important. Here we have little screenshots talking about the great developer activity on Dotsama. So as you all know, probably here, Polkadot is a pretty big ecosystem of blockchains, of parachains. There are many different formats, many different languages, and that means a lot of different possibilities for musicians. Different standards that have different features. So on the left, we have all the EVM compatible formats that already exist on Ethereum and that work with all the EVM compatible parachains that are out there, and the platforms also. Here we have ink-based NFTs. So a lot of new parachains are working on other languages and they want to create new formats. And finally, we have RMRK. So RMRK originally was a standard for NFT that was supposed to be multi-chain. And then RMRK 2.0 is actually what brought me here, because it brought composability. And I thought that composability is really cool because for music, it means that one can create a new song out of pieces of music. And for me, that's actually one of the most interesting aspects of electronic music. So enough about the technology. Just wanted to mention a few artists. So most musicians on Dotsama are in the Chaos Collective, not all. For example, you might have noticed I'm wearing a Nadir World t-shirt. It's an artist friend of mine who released a few video clips and music on Dotsama. But here we have a lot of Chaos Collective artists, not all of them. Actually, I think I'm going to publish the interviews that I did with them later in some form. Here we have a little collage of some of the artworks that they did. We have the Burp Tapes by Bowser Stacks. We have Rich Valentino's album. We have Rubentopia. I don't think he's part of the collective, I'm not sure. And here there is this multi-resource album that I recommend that everybody buys. It's really good. It has the best of all the artists in the collective. And the interface that you see is singular. So it shows how we're using multi-resource NFTs to create an album that is one NFT. Something that is really neat for music, I think. And then I wanted to mention Neon Crisis, a project that is the fruit of a collaboration between two artists from the Chaos Collective. What's interesting about it, in my opinion, is that it's multimedia. It's at the same time music, a book, images. It's a whole metaverse, a whole universe. And what's great about NFTs is that it allows artists to create new things that not merely reproduce what was before, but transcend the medium itself. And that's something I think is really exciting. So now let's talk about the proof of concept that I made for music NFTs. So personally, I'm a big fan of electronic music, and I was trying to figure out what NFTs can bring to music as something innovative that will create something new. So I thought about the drum machines and the samplers that in the 70s have revolutionized music. Thanks to them, we have techno, house, hip-hop, all the modern genres basically, where start from the idea that a musician can sample a loop and then they can sequence it into a beat. So they can start with a kick and then a snare, hi-hat, bass, and then samples, and then we have new music. So today in the era of Web 2.0, we have Splice. Splice is a pretty cool platform that is basically a market for music samples where artists can legally sample something and retribute the artist that created the original sample. But this is still very much Web 2.0, so I think now we have to create the same markets, but in a decentralized manner. StemsDAO, I mentioned before, is trying to do something similar, but I wanted to do something on Dotsama. So this is my proof of concept. Right now it has only 2 artists, might have other joining in later. So the idea is to illustrate what composable NFTs are for music. Here is a song separated into different tracks, the different instruments, and there are different possibilities for each of those instruments. And what I'm imagining is that in the future, people can buy those. Like each of these buttons is a music loop, and then they can add them onto their own sampler, like a composable NFT, and it creates a new song. And then they can play around, maybe record it. Maybe the record itself is a new NFT that is spawned out of a composable NFT. There are so many possibilities, but first, I just wanted to make something really simple because I wanted to get feedback from the community on the user experience and what exactly they're looking for in music NFTs. So please check it out and send me feedback on Twitter. So we're reaching the end of my talk, and I want to mention Ethereum. So I come from the space of Ethereum, but also I think it's impossible not to mention it when it comes to the most famous collections and the volume. So here we have a comparison of standards on both Dotsama and Ethereum. So it looks like there are way more possibilities on Dotsama, and that's true. There are way more standards, way more teams trying to make something different. But I think we shouldn't forget that the two standards that are on Ethereum have the biggest volume and are the most famous projects. So I don't think it's possible to really ignore them. And so that's why I think that what most projects should be doing is, like Moonzama, find a hybrid architecture where somehow we're bridging the two worlds. Like we want the money and the security and the prestige of Ethereum, but we want the features and the innovation of Dotsama. And I think it's possible to build DAOs or NFT projects that are using both, and that actually could be another subject of a talk. The technical implementation is not that easy, but for me, that's really the future. So finally, I want to finish with how we can improve, because it's the spirit of this ecosystem, right, that we're still building and we're still innovating. I've asked a lot of musicians what they wanted to change, and I think number one that everybody agreed on is that we need a music player, some kind of music app that plays NFTs. So we already have that with Singular, Talisman, and Polkadot, but they're not really music specialized. And so we need an interface that's really music specialized, but more importantly, it should be a mobile app, because we want to be able to listen to our music when we walk around. We want to have our NFT library in our pockets. And unfortunately, a mobile app and a music app is a lot of work. So let's see who can succeed in doing that. I think another challenge, of course, is we need to onboard more people. We need to communicate a lot on the innovations of the ecosystem. I've heard things about licensing. So what I was mentioning about IP NFTs is we need more standards on royalty distribution. And finally, I heard an idea that is actually exciting me, is we should definitely organize a music festival for Dotsama now that the pandemic is slowing down. And that's it for my recommendations. I have no doubt that we will all going to make it. And finally, I want to thank Coxed, who helped me make the presentation. I want to thank the whole Chaos Collective, who are great people and who really gave me good insights on music NFTs in Dotsama. I want to thank the FVK, who did a great thread on Twitter. I think it was yesterday or the day before, that helped me out. And finally, of course, the whole community, who, as usual, is very supportive, and of course, the organizers of ParisDOT.Comm, who made these great events that I'm really glad to be part of.